Sustain267.
Welcome back to Sustain267, where we bring you insights and deep dives into climate change, sustainability, and the environment in Botswana and the rest of Africa. I am your host, Bertha Foundation. Today we continue with episode 3 of our special 12-part series that examines the dangerous disinformation around fossil fuels. This series focuses on the persistent myth that fossil fuels will drive development in Africa. It's a story that has been spun for decades by the fossil fuel industry. And in this episode, we'll be diving into the specific case of Masama coal mine owned by Medie Limited in Botswana. So, what are the real benefits and costs of fossil fuel extraction for development? And perhaps more importantly, who truly benefits? In the first 2 episodes of the series, we unpacked the disinformation that fossil fuels will develop Africa. And in the second episode, we look at who shares this message and what they have to benefit. To hear more, I highly recommend you go and listen to episode 1 and episode 2, and then we meet right back here on episode 3. In this episode, we dig into the financial data for Medie Limited, the company behind the Masama coal mine, and contrast their reported growth with the very real costs, environmental, financial, and social, which are borne by communities like Medie. So, let's dig into the numbers, the narratives, and the truth behind the so-called development fossil fuels are bringing. To understand how disinformation works, we need to look at the financial success stories being told by these companies. Masama coal mine, operated by Medie Coal, which is owned by Botswana Stock Exchange listed Medie Limited, began its journey in 2018 with a private investment of 72 million pula, approximately $5 million. Which was raised through a select group of investors. This wasn't a public offering, mind you, which means that ordinary Botswana citizens had no access to invest in what was pitched as a high potential project. It was reserved for those with deep pockets and insider knowledge. Fast forward to 2019. Medie came to production and was backed with 90 million pula, approximately $6.5 million from the Botswana Development Corporation, which is the government's main investment arm. That's public money, taxpayer money, invested in this coal mine, supposedly to drive economic growth and diversify the economy. By 2023, the government's total loan investment had grown to over 300 million pula, approximately $22.5 million. Funded by both Botswana Development Corporation, BDC, and Minerals Development Company Botswana, MDCB, which is the government's investment arm that holds and manages mining and mineral assets. At first glance, Medie Limited's financial... At first glance of Medie Limited's financial performance, the numbers look pretty impressive. The coal boom of 2022 brought Medie's revenue from 193 million pula in 2021 to a whopping 425 million pula by 2022. This growth was largely driven by an increasing demand from Europe and Asia, especially as these markets were looking for alternative coal supplies due to various factors, particularly the Russia-Ukraine war. But when we start to peel back the layers, we begin to see the cracks. For 2023, the company posted a pre-tax loss of 176 million baht, continuing a pattern of losses that has plagued the company since it began production. Even though its gross margins have improved from minus 85% in 2020 to minus 9% in 2023, the company still spends more to produce coal than it earns in sales. And according to the area member of parliament, Honorable Naniki Makwenja, as heard in episode 2, the defense for this is that coal mining usually takes longer to be profitable than most other fossil fuels. However, despite reporting remarkable revenue growth, Medie still posted an operating loss of 74 million for 2023. Yes, this is an improvement from the previous year's loss in 2022 of 85 million pula. But it still raises the question, why is this project continuously burning through taxpayers' money while reporting such high revenues? And more importantly, who is benefiting from this? Much of the profit narrative centers around external markets. European countries seeking external security, Eastern markets shifting away from traditional suppliers, yet local communities in Botswana seeing very little of these profits. This dissonance between reported financial success and community-level impact is a hallmark of disinformation campaigns around fossil fuel projects in Botswana and the rest of the continent. Think about it. While the company boasts of revenue spikes and strategic positioning in the global market, what does that mean for the people of Medie? Do they feel these financial benefits trickle down? Well, keep listening and I'll attempt to answer that question for you. Let's go back to Medie, a village in Botswana where I spent 2 weeks earlier this year observing these coal-driven developments in action. During these 2 weeks, I rented out the log cabin of a generous farmer. I spent 2 years observing these coal-driven developments in action. During these 2 weeks, I stayed in a farmhouse that was very generously rented to me by one of the farmers from Medie. It was a lovely log cabin with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and running water from a borehole. I just had to boil my bath water in a bucket because there was no running hot water. But then again, it is a village. And I had to go and rent from the farmer because in Medie village, there is no accommodation available for short-term rental because the people who come to visit the mine drive in daily either from Lentsweletau, a bigger village nearby, or from the capital city in Gaborone, which is about 60 kilometers away. So there's no accommodation. That means no bed and breakfast, no hotels, and the like. Back to the developments. On paper, this is where the supposed developments should be taking place. After all, it's the community closest to the mine, less than 5 kilometers away from it, in fact. Medie is home to a single health post, a primary school, 4 bars, and of course, the Masama coal mine. To bring you to Medie with me, Medie, it's about a 30-minute by gravel road drive away from Lentsweletau, which is the big village next to it. As you drive on the dirt road, you come across quite a number of trucks. So lots of dust, lots of trucks coming from the mine with coal, where you need to slow down quite a bit for visibility. And on the sides of the road, I observed crop farms from local farmers in the area. Medie Limited claims that the mine has spurred local economic development. In fact, let's hear exactly what they had to say in their 2023 Integrated Annual Report.
Since its inception, Medie has contributed significantly to the development of communities around the mining operations in areas of economic development, education, arts, sports, and healthcare. We understand the importance of supporting and caring for the communities in and around our area of operation. In the section of corporate social investment and community support, we discuss the various initiatives that Medie has undertaken to support the community that we are a part of. On Sustainable Development Goals, we are addressing Goal 1 of No Poverty by employing 3 staff and paying 19 million pula in salaries.
This is true. However, it is worth noting that in 2023, the highest paid director at Medie Limited received a remuneration of 3,441,710 pula. In contrast, the average wage for employees was 26,212 pula to thebe. This means the highest paid director approximately 131 times more than the average employee.
Goal 2, Zero Hunger. We paid 6.5 million pula in taxation and payee and paid 15 million pula in royalties. Additionally, applying the multiplier effect, our community support and development directly impact approximately 3,200 people.
Worth noting that multiplier effect means they're counting those who benefited directly from the mine, like an employee, and people who may have benefited from those who benefited, and so forth and so forth.
On Goal 3, Good Health and Well-being, amongst other items, we have partially or fully vaccinated 97% of our employees, and there is an accessible clinic in Medie.
So the vaccines were provided by the government of Botswana. And the clinic is actually a health post that has been there since before the mine. However, it does service the employees and staff of the mine because the mine doesn't have an on-site clinic.
Goal 4, Quality Education. We support the Medie Primary School.
We have supported the primary school by connecting them to Wi-Fi, and according to VDC, they donate approximately 5,000 pula annually for the school prize giving.
Goal 7. Through electrification of the mine, funded by Medie, the local Medie village has benefited, allowing 500 people access to electricity through a prepaid system.
This they have done. Kudos, Medie.
Goal 8. Decent work and economic growth. Various internships were undertaken and local employment was used for fencing and related tasks, as well as traffic controllers and security, entrepreneurial businesses established in Medie area, spazas and food stalls, rental housing, first supermarket, and new building supply outlets.
For some context, the local employment, which was used for fencing and related tasks, that's temporary employment without job security or benefits. And the new entrepreneurial businesses, the mine had no direct hand in establishing or funding the establishment of these businesses. It seems rather disingenuous to report them as a success of the mine.
Goal 14. Life below sea. The Masama coal mine is situated in Botswana, which is a landlocked country. Coal bound for international markets pass through either the Walvis Bay or Maputo harbors, provided market conditions are suitable for export.
Not quite clear how this enhances life below sea.
We care about our communities. We have a corporate social investment CSI plan in place, and each year activities are undertaken through the guidance of the Social and Ethics Committee. A community committee is in place, which Medie is a part of, to highlight community needs and to determine where support can be provided.
I had the pleasure of having a chat with the community committee chairperson who shared some of his frustrations, mainly being that the mine does not bring decision makers to these meetings and matters tabled pinned in perpetuity.
Our involvement in the CSI project is subject to approval from the board and is dependent on profit and cash flow availability. At our own expense, we have undertaken dust suppression on roads in and around the villages and along farming-sensitive areas adjacent to the road to ensure dust does not impact the lives of the people.
The mine saw a financial boom in 2022. This is not quite reflected in the support given to the community. And the dust being suppressed at the expense of Medie Limited, that was not a problem prior to Masama coal mine activity, which makes revenue for Medie Limited.
Dust suppression is also undertaken on the roads used by trucks through the villages. A public-private partnership with the Botswana government to tar roads is progressing well and will support further mine expansion, making access to and from the mine easier and quicker.
Again, the dust in Medie was not a challenge until the mining activity started. Additionally, the tarred road that has not yet been built was one of the main sellers to the community in endorsing the mine. The conditions of what would have to happen for the road to be built were not shared during the consultations. There was a huge lack of transparency here.
Medie continues to provide Wi-Fi access to Medie Primary School, the clinic and the Khotla. And to support the school as well as others in the area, the community also makes use of the community hall built by Medie for events.
The community hall was not built by Medie and was there before Medie arrived in Medie.
In addition, cleanup campaigns continue, encouraging the community to care for the environment.
Encouraged by a coal mining company.
As a result of the mine operating outside the village of Medie, the following businesses were started by local entrepreneurs, which would not have been the case if no mine was developed. Various spaza shops and food stalls to supply for the needs of transporters and mine staff.
This point is raised multiple times in this report, and again, the mine had no hand in the opening of these businesses directly. The tuck shop services the workers, but the operations of the tuck shop stopped when the operations of the mine stopped in 2023. Only, there was no one to bail out these small businesses, and some did not survive.
Additional housing built for local owners and offered for rental to mine staff and contractors.
This is true, however. People in Medie, including the Khosi's elderly mother, share that they did build houses because they were told that staff would be coming in numbers coming to work for the mine. However, they sit with empty houses because the mine transports their staff from a nearby, more developed village, Linzoletau, leaving the villagers with newly built, vacant houses.
Supplementary telecommunication infrastructure in the form of cellular towers for cell phones to increase service provider options and coverage. Refurbishment of the community hall for community use.
That they did, and I must say, the coverage was very impressive.
Access to electricity through a prepaid system. Opening of a luxury lodge by local businessmen for accommodation and functions.
The luxury lodge by a local businessman is about 20-30 minutes drive on a dirt road, and on the weeks I was there, it was unfortunately closed due to lack of business. The benefits are often overstated, while the costs are downplayed. Yes, some businesses have sprouted up around the mine, but they're precarious and dependent entirely on the mine's continued operation. If the mine closes, as it did briefly in 2023, these businesses are left stranded with no alternative sources of income. Then there's the issue of jobs. Medie proudly touts that it has local hiring policies within the village of Medie, but when we ask the residents of Medie, a different story emerges. At the time of this interview, this is when the mine was still reopening after its brief closing. There were over 200 employees working at Masama coal mine, yet less than 10 of them were from Medie village. The skills transfer program, often highlighted in the company's corporate social responsibility report, remains theoretical. Many residents, including the local chief, say they've seen little evidence of training or long-term employment opportunities. It's clear that the benefits, while real, are far from transformative. And when we weigh these against environmental degradation, social costs, and the heavy reliance on a single industry, the supposed development starts to look more like dependence. Dependence on a mine that has a 25-year license, mining a highly polluting fossil fuel with a bleak future due to the climate crisis and better energies becoming available. Speaking of dependencies, another critical issue that needs to be addressed is Medie's growing financial dependencies. According to the most recent data, Medie's current liabilities have ballooned from 1.7 million pula in 2017 to a staggering 409 million pula in 2023. This includes significant loans from related parties, with related party loans reaching 661 million pula by 2023. This heavy reliance on short-term financing and related party loans underscores the precarious financial position the company is in. Medie Limited's negative equity of 319 million pula in 2023 further highlights these challenges. Its liabilities now exceed its assets. And with that said, what does it mean for the future? If Medie Limited cannot turn its finances around, the government, and by extension, the public, you and me, could be on the hook for bailing out the mine once again. It's a common story in extractive industries. Local communities bear the environmental and social costs while only receiving peripheral benefits. Where all the benefits they enjoy and have been, it's because they are primarily needed by the mine. They're the beneficiaries of the mine's activities, good or bad. And sometimes this looks like bringing electricity much closer to the home and making it cheaper to connect to the grid. And at other times, it looks like having everything in your house caked in dust all the time. From the trucks that come to the mine and drive out of the mine, carrying coal to markets far away, and not knowing the effect of that dust on one's health. Is that what development looks like? Should a community's prosperity hinge on the success or failure of a single coal mine? 2023 brought a sharp reality check for Medie and its operations at Masama coal mine. After the coal price dropped by 33% in March, the company had to temporarily close the mine and seek government bailout. The Botswana government, through MDCB, stepped in with 90 million in August, and by December, Medie had secured 299 million pula in funding from MDCB Botswana again. This was shared in a press release by Medie Limited. Catch this? The press release was issued and released by their South African strategic communications contractor, Kita Rec Investor Solutions, the country that is funding the mine and apparently being developed by the activities of the mine. The financial instability is deeply concerning, especially given the significant public funds involved. Medie has received millions in loans from BDC and MDCB, both of which are government-backed entities. Essentially, Botswana taxpayers are funding a coal mine that is yet to prove it can sustain itself. These bailouts, essentially funded by the public, raise serious questions. Why is the government continuing to invest in a company that is struggling to stay profitable? And is this the kind of development that Botswana should be investing in? Should public money be used to prop up a coal mine when the world is moving towards renewable energy? And what happens to the small businesses and workers in Medie when the coal prices dip again and the mine faces further shutdowns? Medie still strongly carries the message that Masama coal mine will contribute to the development of both Medie and Botswana. Medie blames external factors, global market fluctuations, geopolitics, and supply chain disruptions. But the deeper issue here is the inherent volatility of the fossil fuel industry, particularly in a world that is increasingly turning towards cleaner alternatives, and believing that such an industry can drive development. The financial risk isn't just on the company, it's on the entire community and the country's economic future. Again, it begs the question, if the company cannot sustain profitability despite if the company cannot sustain profitability at present, despite favorable market conditions, what happens when the tide turns? What happens to the promise of developing Medie, to the promise of developing Botswana? Then there are the environmental costs, which continue to mount. Coal is notorious for its environmental degradation, and the Masama coal mine is no exception. Meanwhile, the environmental costs continue to mount. Medie's 2023 report briefly mentions efforts to manage dust, noise, and air quality, but the company's environmental practices remain rather vague and unconvincing. What we do know is that coal mining is one of the leading contributors to the climate crisis, and Botswana stands to bear the brunt of the climate impacts. It's an uncomfortable reality. The very industries that are contributing to the climate crisis are the ones being propped up with public money under the guise of development. And yet, the communities most impacted by these projects, like Medie, see very little of the financial benefits while bearing a disproportionate share of the environmental costs. But we'll revisit the environmental costs in episode 4. Let's get back to the disinformation. At the heart of this issue is the disinformation campaign surrounding fossil fuels and development. Companies like Medie Limited continue to push the narrative that coal will bring prosperity to Africa. And our governments buy it and put money towards it. But when we look at the numbers, we see a different story. The real winners here are the shareholders, the executives, and the foreign markets. The local communities at best get crumbs and often pay the price in the form of environmental degradation and job insecurity. Meanwhile, the social fabric of Medie is being tested. The community, promised prosperity, instead faces the volatility of relying on a single industry. Jobs may have come, but they're not secure or necessarily benefiting the local population as much as expected and as much as has been said by Medie Limited. The skills transfer programs touted in corporate reports appear to be more theoretical than practical, with very little tangible impact on improving social livelihoods. When the mine closed briefly last year, people lost their jobs. And social interruptions, for example, teenage pregnancy, as referred to in the EIA report. Medie's 2022 report highlights that they paid 6.5 million pula in taxes, including payee, and 15 million pula in royalties. But here's something to think about. The company's CEO at the time, Monet Duplessis, received remuneration of 3.4 million pula in 2023. That's more than half of what the government earned in taxes from the entire project that year. How can we call this development when the wealth is so concentrated in the hands of so few, while the country as a whole sees such minimal returns? And this is the crux of the disinformation we're talking about in the series. It's not just about lies, it's about narratives that obscure the truth. Yes, fossil fuels can bring short-term economic gains, but at what cost? What does it mean for Botswana to invest so heavily in an industry that is driving the climate crisis and whose profits are not truly shared with its people? And as we look forward, the pressing question remains, is this model of development sustainable or even ethical? The financial instability of Medie, coupled with the environmental and social costs, paint a grim picture for the future of Medie and Botswana. With global shifts towards renewable energy, the reliance on coal is not environmentally unsustainable, but also just economically precarious. Medie Limited was contacted for comment To hear more about some of the projects and how they've developed the Medie village, unfortunately, after reaching out numerous times, we did not hear back from Medie. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sustain267 Podcast. In the next episode, the fourth and final one for Botswana, we look at the relationship between disinformation that fossil fuels will develop Africa and the communities and the climate crisis. As a country that has contributed so little to the climate crisis, what will the continued extraction of coal mean for how we are impacted by climate change and our preparedness? Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustain267 Podcast. Find a list of resources used for this episode in the episode description. And don't forget to subscribe to Sustain267 Podcast channel on the platform you're listening on so you are the first to know when the next episode drops. I am the host of Sustain267 Podcast, Bertha Foundation, and the sound engineer is Maleho Makoti. We had support from Sotiris Sideris, who helped us look into the financial statements of Medie Limited. Let's connect on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on our handle at Sustain267 and continue the conversation. This series is part of my work as a Bertha Foundation Fellow, hosted by the Botswana Society for Human Development. Take care.
Sustain267.